Well, hi, everybody, and thanks for joining today. This is Bruce Collins with Cambium Networks. I'm a Director of Product Management. My responsibilities are primarily in the industrial applications and the product portfolio that applies to the industrial space. So today I want to talk to you about cnReach, which is our SCADA process control product, the various options that are available for that product. I have a number of real-world examples of how that product has been deployed. And then I'll give you a sneak peek at what we'll be launching here in the next 30 to 60 days, both a software release that has a number of very interesting features, and then also a high availability station that offers a 1+1 hot standby support for mission critical applications. So I'll give you a little preview of that as well. So for those of you that aren't as familiar with Cambium, we have been involved with industrial applications for a long time. The applications that we talk about or think about in the context of Cambium radios is the SCADA process control. You can see with sensors, monitoring wellheads and substations, water treatment facilities, water distribution facilities. Also video surveillance and security. So that's certainly a big area and growing area that's using broadband technology to deliver video surveillance over long distances. Leased line replacement continues to be a big application. Certainly that has application in both machine-to-machine connections, which we'll be talking about with cnReach, where you're replacing either a satellite link or an older 3G cellular connection, or possibly even a 2-wire, 4-wire analog circuit that might be out there. So there's still lots of opportunities to replace that leased line so you can eliminate the monthly expense and move to a private-owned network. Talked about automation, and then remote office access. That's another area where either using our broadband radios to bring connectivity to a field office, or using our cnPilot Wi-Fi access point to provide Wi-Fi service to the field craft while they're in away from the home office. One of the things that kind of ties all that together is that we're covering lots of wide geographic areas. We have multiple points of presence, and then the need to move data confidently and confidentially, so securely and reliably across that network. So we're really looking at these verticals, meaning electric utilities, oil and gas, rail to the extent that it's rail and yard operations, trackside sensors, and then water treatment, which can be water, wastewater, stormwater, it can be water distribution, and then intelligent transportation, which can fit into a few areas, both rail. We're also doing some applications in the mining area where they're using it for digital signage in the far remote areas out in Australia. I should have mentioned at the beginning that I can take any questions you have as we go through this. Just put them in the chat window on the side there. And then we'll also, you'll get after this is over, you'll get a link in your email showing you where to get a copy of the materials. So when we look at the Cambium Networks industrial portfolio, we've kind of hand selected these products out of the entire set of products that Cambium offers. And these are the ones that really are well suited for industrial applications. So if I start over there on the left, you've got the PTP-820, that's our licensed microwave. Think in terms of gigabits per second, large capacity rings going around large geographic areas. Then you move to the right, you'll get to our PTP-670 and PTP-450i. Soon you'll also see PTP-550, which has been announced. That's a sub-6 gigahertz backhaul, providing tens to hundreds of megabits per second. It's pretty well suited as a spur off of that ring to deliver lots of capacity out to a remote area. Then you've got the PMP-450i. This is a product available in multiple bands. You can see 900, 3 gig, and 5 gig. And this is really well suited for access and video surveillance You can also bring lots of capacity to, say, a substation or a wellhead. Then you've got cnPilot, which is the Wi-Fi access hotspot I mentioned before. The particular of interest is the cnPilot E500. That's an all-outdoor device, provides 360-degree coverage based on 802.11 AC, and is it's all cloud managed, so it's a nice solution for fieldcraft access. And then what we're going to spend the most of the time on today is the cnReach product. That's what we call, it's really useful for SCADA process control, machine-to-machine applications. And we'll spend most of the time talking about that, so I won't belabor that point. So let's go through a few examples of how cnReach is deployed. What I've got here is an example of a water distribution facility. And what you'll see in the lower left is a water tank. So basically a reservoir storing water for a residential area. And what they would like to do, or what they are doing with this application, is you see there in the upper left, the bullets, what they're monitoring using SCADA is the water level. So that's a analog pressure sensor that they're using as an input, so they know how much water is in that tank. There's a water overflow, which is a float sensor, which basically, if the lever arm, if that water level reaches a critical point, it will throw a digital input to say it's about to overflow. There's a hatch cover in case somebody gets into that. You can see that ladder there on the left. If somebody opens that hatch cover for whatever reason, that'll be indicated. There's a panel on the side that you're going to see a picture here on the right. If that panel door opens, then that's also captured. And then there's a button inside there if the person there needs some help, and they can go over there and push that red button and they get some help. So what was interesting about this one is that this customer used to use an older analog technology. They had an RTU there that would convert these sensor points. And then they had an older radio technology that was serial only, and it wasn't a managed system. So what they did was they moved to a cnReach deployment. This is 900 megahertz unlicensed, and it's in a point-to-multi-point configuration. So they have a tower with an Omni sitting on their headquarters area. It's about, in this case, it's about, I believe it's about 8 or 9 miles from the location of this water tank. You can kind of see that, well, it's a little difficult to see, but in the picture on the right, you can see that Yagi pointing back down into the city where it's deployed. And the expectation is that they'll have, they've started deployment on this, and the expectation is to do about 40 or 50 of these tanks around that single Omni. And basically be able to monitor every few minutes, they'll be able to check what's the status of this water tank. And the real benefit from the cnReach perspective is, if you look on the picture in the middle, in the upper middle there, you see the actual cnReach radio and just below it, kind of a visual of where it sits in the cabinet. But if you look at the top of that radio, there's a number of wires connecting into it. And that's taking advantage of the built-in digital and analog I/O that the cnReach radio has. So in this case, they've completely eliminated the need for an external box for I/O conversion. And they're pulling, using Modbus, they're pulling those I/O pins directly on the radio. So they could fit this right in with their standard Modbus software. And as they migrate from the older technology over to the new, it's all pretty transparent from the SCADA master and the control and operations center. Here's another example. This is out in Ohio. This is another water management application. This is with one of our partners, PNR Communications. They've deployed, and a couple things to point out here. On the lower left, you'll see a LINKPlanner output file. So again, for those of you that are familiar with other Cambium products, cnReach is available in LINKPlanner. The goal here was to swap out an existing system and migrate from an unlicensed 900 over to licensed 900. And this is also taking advantage of another feature on cnReach, which is that 900 megahertz radio has both the licensed and unlicensed radio mode built in. So you can make that change just between going from the just through a drop-down software menu. You can switch from licensed to unlicensed without having to make any changes. They also wanted to look at IP management, so they integrated cnMaestro into their operations so they can monitor and manage this network over the IP capability. And then, of course, they use LINKPlanner. So again, you can see the applications of migrating from older technology to new, taking advantage of some of the new techniques. Next up is oil and gas application, and here you can see a pump jack. This kind of gives you a sense of how it stacks together. On the left is a pump jack in a well field, a number of sensors coming into that panel in the middle, into this remote terminal unit. And then if you were to open the door on that lloT RTU, behind that you'd see the cnReach module. And that would be connecting out over that Yagi antenna back to the tower. Another interesting point on this one is that they've overlaid this network with a broadband network as well. So this has both a narrowband cnReach network as well as an overlay with broadband for video surveillance and remote access. Here's just another example showing how cnReach is deployed with an RTU inside a NEMA enclosure. These radios are typically deployed in an enclosure with a short jumper cable going up to a Yagi or an Omni antenna on top of the panel. In this case, you see in the enclosure power supply, starting from the left, a power supply, the cnReach radio, and then that RTU that has. In this case, you'll see the difference being the sensors are being brought into that RTU, the little blue wires on the right. And then the connection between the RTU and the cnReach radio is over Ethernet. So on the previous example, on the water tank application, those sensor pins were going straight into the radio. This kind of gives you a sense of the difference between deploying with an RTU, or for some of those more simple applications, I can eliminate the RTU, one less piece of equipment to manage, and everything goes right into the radio. This one is kind of an interesting one just because the pictures are so beautiful, but it's effectively, this is way up in the northwest of Canada, just on the Canadian side of the Canada-Alaska border. And in this case, they're actually deploying a single radio over IP channel down into a valley that they couldn't reach with any other technology. So they needed to go wireless. They're using a 900 megahertz relay station to relay that signal, single voice channel down into the valley. So you can see it's pretty remote area and difficult to reach. So it's and it's pretty important that link stay up as it's serviceable by helicopter. Next up is a rail application. This is a train yard application. This is a proof of concept that's in progress. Effectively, this is a way to add additional telemetry or additional data collection points to an existing train yard. You can imagine it's pretty difficult to run new wires through this area where there's a dense number of track and trackside equipment. So in this case, the company or the Class 1 rail company that's deploying this is leveraging the relay capability of cnReach. And as it goes through the train yard, which is this snapshot is about several miles long, probably 2 to 3 miles. It's taking advantage of the relay node to go hop to hop to hop from one end of the field to the other, and then bring that data back. So it's again trackside sensors and trackside automation. So if you have other examples of how cnReach is being used, or if you're curious about applications and whether it would work, it'd be great if you reach out to us. You can also go on to our community forum and post ideas on there, and people will, I'm sure, respond and let you know if it's something that we've already done before. Let's talk a little bit about the product in a little more detail. And again, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat window here. On the product itself, some of the key attributes that make up cnReach. First is deployment flexibility. So we take that same exact module and deploy it as either point-to-point, point-to-multipoint, store and forward relay, and then also what we call back-to-back relay. Back-to-back is when I have a dual radio in that unit. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. The other thing that's nice as far as flexibility is we're using the same exact module for the high availability 1+1 station, which you'll see at the end of the presentation today. So you can use the same radio anywhere in the operations. You don't have to worry about stocking different modules for different points in the network. We talked about that optional analog and digital I/O. That's the ability to put analog and digital inputs and outputs directly into the radio and read them using Modbus. We'll talk about more about the bands in a moment. Reliability. This is every one of these units is tested over temperature. They're rated from -40 C up to +70 C. So for very rugged environments, it's well suited for that. Here in the U.S., we have the HAZLOC certifications. Low power consumption. This is typically on the order of a few watts of power consumption. And as with all of Cambium's products, we really focus on spectral efficiency and scalability. This product is no different. It has synchronization, so I can synchronize multiple access points and reduce the amount of self-interference that would come in a field by having adjacent towers and a large high-density network. And then, of course, we support adaptive modulation for adjusting the speeds to meet the environmental conditions that the link can achieve. All these radios come with 128 and 256 encryption, so it's a secure setup. You can do HTTPS and SNMP version 3. Also, it's manageable by CNMeister, which I'll show you a couple of screenshots here in a moment. So another way to visualize how cnReach is deployed, in addition to those use cases, is to have a look at the topologies. So again, that same radio, you can set it up as a point-to-point link, like in the upper left, which is just connecting point A to point B. Or you can set it up as a point-to-multipoint, where I nominate one of the radios as an access point and then have a number of endpoints. Typically, it can be anywhere from a few to several dozen, up to 50 or 60 is kind of the sweet spot there. So the other thing you'll notice on there is there's a couple of repeater nodes. There's a what we call a store and forward repeater, and that's probably what is a traditional repeater module, where the radio is going to talk in the westbound direction for part of the time to get its connection from the access point, and then it's going to talk in the eastbound direction to relay that information down the line. The downside of the store and forward repeater is that it's going to spend half its time talking in each direction, so you lose half the capacity. In the middle of the diagram, you can also see what's called a back-to-back repeater. That's a dual radio mode, and in this case, the radio actually the module has two radios, so they can talk simultaneously, be both in the east and the westbound direction. And so that repeater node does not lose the capacity as it goes through there. So it's a nice application and pretty unique in the industry. I included in the presentation here the sort of little snapshots of the spec sheets. All the detailed specs are on our website. You can download those. Let me just point out a few key attributes here. This 900 megahertz radio is suitable for deployment in the U.S., Canada, many parts of Latin America, and a few other places around the world like Australia and New Zealand. It's available in a single module covering both what is referred to as MAS licensed band 928 to 960 or the ISM unlicensed band 902 to 928. And when it operates in the ISM band, it's a frequency hopping spread spectrum radio, so it's hopping across multiple channels and kind of averaging across the entire spectrum. And then through a drop-down menu, you can switch the whole radio over to a licensed mode, where it's going to operate in a TDD mode, but on a licensed frequency. Next up is a 700 megahertz. This is a product that's available in the United States. It is again a licensed band radio, and this is an exclusive license band that is available from some of our. There's some spectrum brokers and spectrum owners that are working through through bringing this spectrum online effectively. And it's 2 1 megahertz pieces of spectrum, 757 and 787. You can see it's suitable for large power. So we have a 10-watt radio and lots of different channel bandwidths. So as an owner of 700 megahertz spectrum, you can kind of design your own channel plan and develop and deploy these radios to deliver quite a lot of capacity over long distances with the ability to hit that high power, the high power transmission. There's some recorded webinars with some of our partners on the frequency side, well, at least our colleagues on the frequency side, that talk through the process of who has access to 700 megahertz and who do you contact if you're interested in purchasing that spectrum. Next up is 450 megahertz. This is available today in the FCC band. You'll see there the 406 to 430 and 450 to 470. This is also licensed spectrum. Depending on the band and the FCC rule that you're deploying under, it can vary from 2 watts up to 8 watts of power. This is another sneak peek, we'll be introducing a 450 megahertz radio that's compliant with the new ETSI Red directive in Europe. That we expect to be releasing that in the next 4 to 6 weeks. That will also do up to 8 watts and meet the more stringent requirements that ETSI turned on late last year. So watch for some new announcements on that, especially if you're on the webinar today from the EU countries or anywhere in our EMEA region. The initial samples of that ETSI Red radio are out and running in a number of POCs today, so that's we're getting some encouraging results from that. Finally, for the last band is 220 megahertz. This is the most recently introduced. This covers 217 to 222. We also have a webinar on this one on how to apply and get licenses to 220. So if you go on our website and look for the webinars, you'll see a session that we did with Select Spectrum. They're the current broker for this frequency. Or if your operation already has access to 220 megahertz, this is a nice solution for that, and it fits in nicely with all of the rest of the cnReach radios. And the last up here is what we call the I/O expander. This is a module that does not have a radio inside, but it's a nice way to leverage that analog and digital I/O. It can leverage the serial ports for serial connectivity, and where this is most typically used is at the end of a broadband link. So imagine you had deployed a PMP450i network with some subscriber modules. But you also had an application that requires either serial or a handful of analog or digital I/O. You could put one of these I/O expanders at the next to the subscriber module, cable it together with an Ethernet cable, and now you have access to 2 serial ports, another Ethernet port, and some digital analog I/O. It's all managed in the same way as other cnReach radios. So it's a nice adjunct onto a broadband network. So speaking of management, here's a snapshot or a screenshot of cnMaestro. This is our cloud-based and on-premises-based network management application. What you can see here is a couple of nice features related specifically to cnReach. In the middle there, you see device health. It'll show you the the actual topology of how you have the network deployed. So in this case, you can see there's a dual radio in the middle, that ridge mall, that has both an endpoint and it's also acting as an access point. So that's one of those back-to-back repeater nodes. And Maestro will automatically determine all of this topology and display it on the screen. Then you can drill down into each one of those radios and determine its statistics, how much capacity is drawing, if there's any issues or alarms on that device. So it's a nice overall view of the network. And then with cnMaestro, you can also pull in your other Cambium Networks radios and systems so that you can see one end-to-end view of the entire network. There's a few other screenshots. You can see that the map view. You can see statistical charts, and then you can pull up all of the data on a particular radio, all from a centralized location. One of the key things that we also support with cnMaestro and cnReach is the ability to push security parameters. So if I have to change the password on all those radios, the management password, I can set up a job on cnMaestro and push that out to all of the radios at one time. So another point just on the radios, and we talked a fair amount about this as far as connectivity, but because it's a machine-to-machine radio and system, you really want to be able to have the most flexibility to connect to whatever it is that machine can support. So in this case, the radio, each of the modules has two Ethernet ports, two serial interfaces, and then that green connector on the left is a 8-port analog and digital I/O. So that's where I can bring in those individual analog and digital inputs. So what do you want to connect? If you have anything that's got a serial port on it, anything with a 422 or 45 serial bus, any SCADA control systems, anything with an Ethernet port that can talk TCP/IP, or any analog or digital I/O signal. So really pretty flexible as far as what's the kind of machine or sensor or device that you want to interface to. The cnReach has a number of different options and ways to support that. And I also mentioned earlier LINKPlanner. LINKPlanner is our planning tool to provide both prediction of both availability of a link and capacity of a link. So if I pick any 2 points on Earth, I can use LINKPlanner to figure out which technology or which radio is best suited to give me the capacity and availability that I need. So if I'm using 450 megahertz, I can put that in here. I can put in point A and point B, and it'll tell me with this antenna at this height, I can expect to get this capacity. So it's pretty easy to use. It's a free download. You can go to our website and download a copy and start to play with this. And again, this works across all the different products. So whether you're talking about these cnReach narrowband radios, all the way up to the PTP-820, which is gigabits per second radios, you can kind of find what's the right tool for the job across the entire portfolio. Cambium also offers a complete set of antennas and installation kits. You can kind of see some pictures here. Again, these are typically deployed as either Yagis at the endpoints or Omnis at the tower or the access point. Is the typical model. And then these installation kits include everything to make kind of a nice professional install. Includes weatherproofing, all the tie wraps, jumper cables, surge suppressors, everything. It's all included in one installation kit. So it's pretty straightforward for the installers. So I'm going to just wrap up the session today with a couple of sneak peeks at what's coming. We're in the beta process on our 0120 release. There's a couple of, there's quite a few different features in here that are pretty compelling. The first one I list on here is auto configure. This is really a big step forward in usability of the system. Today, it's with the cnReach product, you have to match up the parameters on the endpoints to the access points, and there's quite a few parameters that you have to match up very specifically to make the network operate. With auto configure, you can set the access point to auto configure mode, configure it how you'd like, and then each of the endpoints will come in and automatically discover the network parameters. So if you want to change some modulation schemes, I want to add some different speeds to the network. Maybe I have a new radio I want to put in there that's going to extend the radius of the network. I can make those changes at the access point, and then all of the endpoints will automatically detect that configuration has changed and adjust their settings as well. So it's a big step forward in the maintainability of these networks. So it's pretty interesting, and I've seen this in action now in the field, and it's pretty nice that you can make all these changes from a central point without having to touch all of the remote radios. We have a real-time spectrum analyzer in the radio. So it does take the system out of service, but you can run a spectrum analyzer mode, and it'll give you a real-time view of where is the potential sources of noise coming from, what the noise floor is, so you can give a sense of what modulations would make sense to configure or enable on that link. So it's a nice both a deployment or design tool, but also certainly a troubleshooting tool. Quality service. So now the cnReach will honor the type of service bits. If you want to run quality of service over the link, you can prioritize, for example, your Modbus traffic above or below your management traffic, or vice versa. There's some new serial only modes that reduce the amount of overhead coming from TCP/IP. Effectively, you set up a serial group, and you can provide effectively an end-to-end serial network, so that if I drop one bit into this serial port, it's going to come out the serial port on the other end, and it does that in a very efficient manner. So this is pretty important for licensed band applications that are using serial, because as we migrate to TCP/IP, there's overhead associated with TCP/IP, but the serial only modes help take away some of that overhead. Some customer, this next one is directly driven by one of our customers as a request. There's a legacy Modbus technique, which is called Modbus RTU to Modbus TCP. And the typical way to do that, and as you're migrating to TCP/IP networks, what the traditional approach has been is to put a box next to the radio that does that conversion, that Modbus RTU to TCP conversion. So what we've done with this software feature in the cnReach radio is integrate that conversion capability right inside the radio. So in this case, customers that had been deploying that external box, either from Moxa or Digi or somebody like that, you don't need to deploy that box anymore. So it's one less piece of equipment to configure, one less piece of equipment to fail, and it's all a more integrated solution. So that's another nice feature if you need it. And then there's been a number of security enhancements. We're always updating security every release. There's enhancements there. So we've got some new logging. There's a new SSH update that eliminates some vulnerabilities. And then on usability, we've done at least the next pass at making sure that those radios are more, I guess, misconfiguration friendly. So if you try to put a configuration in there that's not valid, it will at least give you a warning or pop-up message to say you've gone out of bounds, or you've set some settings that are incompatible with each other. So some nice usability enhancements there to make sure you don't get in trouble as you go down and configure some of the more advanced settings. Looks like there's a couple of questions online here, so I want to grab those as we go. One is, can we use the I/O extender with cnReach radios which do not support I/O capabilities? Sure. So you could add on to the if you had a cnReach network and you had deployed it without the I/O, you could come in later and add an I/O expander to add using basically an Ethernet cable to connect that cnReach endpoint out to the I/O extender. You can also deploy I/O extenders in pairs or multiples. If you need more than 8 I/Os, you can add, you can gang them up and have 8 or 16 or 24. Another question about 700 megahertz. Can it be used anywhere outside of the U.S.? No, it's U.S. only today. It's a very specific band that is available and being purchased by, in most cases, large utilities or oil and gas companies have been purchasing that 700 megahertz spectrum. And the last question is more tactical. It's where can I access the webinar? The recording of it, that you'll get an email. It'll be on our community forum, but then everyone who attends will also get an email pointing to where that recording is. On the last sneak peek I wanted to give you, we showed this module down below. You can see an actual picture from our booth at Distributech down in San Antonio 2 weeks ago. Got a lot of good feedback on this device. This is a high availability 1+1 station for cnReach. And what you'll see is it's a rack mount unit. It's 3U rack mount, but the application for it is high availability, mission critical, eliminates truck rolls in the middle of the night dispatches. So if a radio stops responding or a power supply fails, it'll swing over to the backup radio and continue on. And then you can do your maintenance windows with no downtime. So you can go up to this panel in the front and switch it over to the backup and then do whatever maintenance or software or firmware updates you need to do on the other radio and then swing it back into service. You can put this module at either the access point or the endpoint or in a relay configuration using store and forward relay or in a point-to-point. So it's pretty flexible. You can use it in different ways. It's also available on all the bands, so 900, 700, 450, and 220. And one of the things I mentioned earlier was when you talk about the features, it's a hot swappable, so that this whole unit slides out on a drawer or some side rails. And then when you open the lid, you'll see in there that the hot swappable radios are the exact same radios that you've seen in the other pictures throughout the deck. So you don't have to keep a separate set of spares just for the high availability station. It's the same radio that you're using everywhere else in the network. It's got that front panel LCD display so you can monitor the status. Everything's green, power and radio communications. It also does some pretty intelligent monitoring of the network. So it will monitor if it's a point to multi-point and it's an access point and it's normally able to see, say 20 radios. If for some reason it can't see any radios or can't talk to any radios, it'll automatically switch over to the backup and see if that's the issue. So it gives you not just a power outage or a non-responsive, but it is looking at some of those other logics situations that you would want to switch over to the backup. And then it is today remotely manageable using SNMP, and ultimately will be pulled into cnMaestro with the ability to remotely manage this as far as when is it in alarm status, when has it failed over, and actually be able to remotely push it into the failover mode where it goes to its backup radio. So this will be, like I said, we showed this at Distributech 2 weeks ago. We'll be doing beta later this quarter and expect to start have availability of this product in April. So that's the main content of the webinar today. If you have any other questions, appreciated those questions that came in before. If you have other ones, you can ask them now, or if you'd like, you can go on to our community.cambiumnetworks.com. Have a look at the forums on there. Some of those questions may have been asked or answered already, but certainly it's a great resource. If you have a question, you can look at our knowledge base, or if you want to start a topic, you'll get not only feedback from your peers, other operators around the world, but also from the engineering and support teams here at Cambium. that can look at these forms and respond pretty quickly in real time. So with that, I appreciate everybody's time for joining the webinar today. If you have any further questions, go ahead and put them in the chat window now. Otherwise, we will be talking down the road at another webinar in the future. Thanks again for joining.